The steam from the soup curled up in the warm yellow light of my small kitchen, filling the air with the scent of chicken and herbs. I had set the table just like I always did, 2 bowls, 2 spoons, a basket of cornbread still warm from the oven. My granddaughter Emily climbed into the chair across from me. Her little hands stayed folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the food, as though it were something she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch. And then, in a voice so quiet it nearly broke in half, she whispered, "Grandma, am I allowed to eat tonight? If you are hearing my story right now, I ask you, tell me in the comments how this moment makes you feel. And if you're watching from the US, Canada, or anywhere in the world, let me know where you are listening from. Your voices matter. Please subscribe to this channel so we can keep sharing stories that remind us to listen when a child speaks, even if it's only in a trembling whisper." My name is Margaret Hale. I am 71 years old, a retired librarian, living in a quiet coastal town in Oregon. My life these days is simple, tending to my rose garden, reading by the window, and keeping the kettle ready for when neighbors stop by. Yet nothing in all my years prepared me for the look in Emily's eyes that night. I smiled as gently as I could, sliding the bowl closer to her. "Of course you can eat, sweetheart," I told her, steadying my voice, even though something sharp twisted inside me. The spoon rattled softly in her small hand before falling against the table with a sound that felt far too loud for the room. Tears welled up in her eyes, and then her shoulders shook with sobs so raw they seemed to come from the very bottom of her little chest. I reached across, resting my hand on hers, though I felt how cold her skin was. She leaned into me, trembling as though she had been holding her breath for years and had only now let it out. My kitchen, this safe, ordinary place, suddenly felt like a stage where a hidden tragedy had decided to reveal itself. As she wept, my thoughts scrambled. Why would a child of 7 even wonder if she was allowed to eat? Who planted such fear in her mind? And yet, as much as my heart screamed for answers, I knew I had to move slowly. Emily needed comfort more than questions, so I fed her spoon by spoon, wiping her cheeks with a napkin, murmuring words of reassurance. I spoke of simple things, how cornbread tastes better when it's still warm, how soup always heals on a cool evening. But under each word lay the weight of unspoken horror. Something was deeply wrong in her home, something no one else had seen. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she clutched the blanket to her chin and stared at me with wide, wet eyes. I stroked her hair until her breathing slowed, but even in sleep, her lashes were still damp with tears. Watching her, I felt the same chill I had felt years ago when a storm rolled in from the sea, silent at first, then sudden and fierce. In that moment, I made a promise to myself whatever storm Emily had been forced to live under it would not be hers to face alone anymore. The next morning, the sunlight spilled across my kitchen table, warming the wood, the way it had for decades. I poured Emily a glass of milk the same way I had for my own children when they were small. She wrapped her little hands around the glass but did not drink. Her eyes flicked toward me, cautious, almost pleading. Then in that same trembling whisper as the night before, she asked Grandma, "May I drink this?" I felt my breath catch in my chest. Milk. Something so simple, so ordinary had become a privilege she thought she needed to earn. I forced my lips into a gentle smile, though inside I was crumbling. "Yes, darling. Of course you may." Only then did she raise the glass to her lips, sipping in tiny, careful gulps, as if afraid someone might take it away at any second. The rest of the day passed in fragments of unease. When I told her it was time to watch her favorite cartoon, she sat on the couch but did not reach for the remote. Instead, she turned her wide eyes toward me, voice barely audible. Am I allowed to turn it on? Later, when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the living room, I suggested bedtime. Emily walked to the lamp, hesitated, and turned to me again. "Grandma, may I turn off the light now?" Each question was like a nail driven into my heart. What kind of world teaches a child to doubt her right to drink, to watch, to sleep? I knew discipline. Of course, I had raised 3 children myself. But this was not discipline. This was fear so deeply sewn into her that even the smallest action felt dangerous. That evening, after Emily had finally fallen asleep, still clutching her blanket as though it were her only shield, I stepped out onto the porch to steady myself. The ocean air was cool against my face, carrying the faint scent of salt and pine. Across the street, my old neighbor Tom was sitting in his rocking chair the way he always did at dusk. "Evening, Margaret," he called softly. His voice had grown raspy with age, but his eyes were still sharp. I hesitated, then crossed over. Tom had lived next door for nearly 40 years. He had seen everything this little street had weathered. He leaned forward on his cane as I sat down beside him. "I've been meaning to ask," he said quietly, glancing toward my house. "Is Emily all right?" The question startled me. "Why do you ask, Tom?" Sighed the kind of sigh that comes from carrying too many unspoken observations. I've noticed her, standing by the window, sometimes just staring out, not the way children usually do, not daydreaming. Her eyes are red like she's been crying, and she doesn't wave when I try to catch her attention, just turns away. His words sank into me like stones in water rippling outward until I could hardly breathe. It wasn't just me noticing the shadows in Emily's behavior. Others had seen it too. I tried to keep my composure, but my hands twisted in my lap. She's been different," I admitted, my voice low. "She asks permission for everything, Tom. To eat, to drink, even to breathe, it seems." Tom's jaw tightened and he tapped his cane against the porch. "That's not right. Not for a child." I nodded, unable to speak. The truth was too heavy. I looked back toward my house where the warm light glowed through the curtains. Inside, Emily slept under my roof, but it felt as if invisible chains still bound her. When I returned to her side, I sat quietly by her bed, watching her small chest rise and fall. Every so often, her fingers twitched, as if she were bracing against some unseen scolding. I reached out, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "Emily," I whispered, though she could not hear me. "Whatever rules they have pressed upon you, they will not follow you here. Not in this house." But even as I said the words, I felt the suffocating weight of a question pressing in. What exactly had been done to this child, and how long had she been living in this silent terror? The house felt different now, heavier, as though each room was filled not only with furniture and old books, but with the ghostly presence of those invisible rules Emily carried on her small shoulders. A law written by someone else enforced in every glance, every hesitation. And until I uncovered the truth, my home too would remain under its shadow. That night, lying awake, I knew this was only the beginning. Sleep would not come easily that night. I lay awake listening to the faint creaks of the old house, my thoughts circling endlessly around Emily and those trembling questions of hers. Fear like that does not appear out of nowhere. It has roots tangled deep in the soil of memory, and as I stared at the ceiling, the past began to rise before me like a film playing across the shadows. I saw Anna again. Anna, my first daughter-in-law, Emily's mother. She had been a nurse at the small county hospital, a woman with gentle hands and a smile that could soften even the harshest day. I used to tease her that she had inherited the ocean's calm, steady, endless, full of quiet strength. At Sunday dinners in my house, she always made sure Emily's plate was full before serving herself. "Little ones should eat first," she would say with a laugh, slipping the sweetest piece of cornbread onto Emily's plate, while my son James looked on with pride. Those meals were noisy with laughter back then. Emily would toddle around the kitchen, her curls bouncing as she clung to her mother's skirt, chanting, "Mommy, Mommy," in that sweet sing-song voice children have. I remember thinking this is what home is meant to be. Warm food, warm hands, a child who knows she is safe. But fate is merciless. The call came one rainy evening, sirens in the distance still echoing through the phone line. A traffic accident. Anna was gone before James could even reach the hospital. Emily was 4 years old. I still see her tiny face pressed against James's shoulder in that sterile waiting room asking, "Where's Mommy?" James's tears soaked into her hair, and I turned away, unable to answer. Grief rearranges a family in ways no one prepares for. James threw himself into work at the shipyard, taking extra shifts, trying to pay the bills and silence the emptiness. Emily stayed mostly at his side, clinging to him with a fierce devotion, but he was often too weary to notice the sadness pooling in her eyes. I offered to take Emily more often to ease the weight, but James insisted he could manage. He wanted to be both father and mother to his little girl. I admired his determination, even as I worried. 2 years passed. Slowly, James began to smile again, though the smile never quite reached his eyes. Then one afternoon, he came to me with a look I had not seen in so long. Hope. "Mom, I've met someone," he said. "Her name is Clara. She's a widow. She understands loss. She's kind. I think she'll be good for Emily." Clara. I remember the first time she walked through my door holding a homemade pie still warm in its dish. She had dark hair pinned neatly, and she greeted me with a practiced warmth. She bent low to Emily's height, brushing the child's hair from her forehead. "She's precious," she said sweetly. "I'll love her as if she were my own." I wanted to believe her. Truly I did, for James's sake, for Emily's. He deserved a second chance at happiness, and Emily deserved a woman's touch, someone to braid her hair, to guide her through the years ahead. And so I quieted the unease I felt when Emily only pressed closer to me, refusing to return Clara's smile. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the first warning, a child's instinct sharper than any adult's judgment. But at the time, I silenced my doubts. I told myself Clara was the answer to prayers I had whispered in the long nights after Anna's death. For a while, it seemed almost true. Clara cooked with practiced skill, set the table with care, and laughed brightly at James's stories. The neighbors praised her. The church welcomed her, and I, desperate to see light in my son's life again, convinced myself that Emily would learn to love her new stepmother in time. I see now how easily appearances can deceive. For a while, life seemed to settle into something resembling normal. James went to work, Clara kept house, and Emily, though quieter than before, learned to move through the routines of this new family. I told myself again and again that time would soften the sharp edges of loss, that a child so young would eventually accept love, even if it came from another woman's hand. But then Noah was born. I remember the day clearly, the hospital room filled with congratulatory flowers, Clara's radiant smile as she cradled her newborn son, and James's proud voice as he called me to meet my grandson. "Mom," he said, his eyes shining, "doesn't he look just like Anna? Those big round eyes." He meant it as comfort, perhaps as a blessing, but I couldn't miss the way Emily stood in the corner clutching her old rag doll to her chest. No one noticed the way her lips pressed tight, or how she turned her face away when Clara invited her closer. From that moment, the house's balance shifted. Conversations revolved around feeding schedules, baby blankets, and Noah's every coo. Clara's arms, once extended to both children, now seemed reserved only for her son. Emily hovered nearby, watching silently, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress. James, burdened with long hours at the shipyard, rarely saw what unfolded in those quiet spaces between daylight and dusk. When he came home exhausted but eager to see his family, Clara would place Noah in his arms, and the room would fill with laughter. Emily would stand a few feet away, waiting, hoping until James, blind with joy, patted her head absent-mindedly before returning his gaze to the infant. It was not cruelty, at least not at first. It was neglect disguised as normal family life. But neglect carves deep scars all the same. The first to notice beyond me was Emily's teacher, Miss Harper. A young woman with kind eyes, she stopped me one afternoon outside the school gates. "Mrs. "Hail," she began, gently. "Have you noticed any changes in Emily?" My chest tightened. "Changes?" Miss Harper hesitated, then continued. "She doesn't talk much in class anymore. When the children draw families, she sketches a mother, a father, a baby boy, and a small figure off to the side. No face, no details, just small." I closed my eyes for a moment, fighting the sting of tears. "She used to draw in bright colors," I murmured. "Yes," Miss Harper agreed softly. "Now it's always that shadow. I've asked her about it, but she just shrugs. It worries me." Her words echoed in my ears long after I left the schoolyard. At home, I watched Emily more closely. how she hovered at the doorway when Clara sang to Noah, how she hesitated before speaking, how she shrank into herself as if afraid of taking up space. One evening, I sat beside her while she doodled at the kitchen table. She pushed the paper toward me shyly. It was another drawing, Noah in Clara's arms, James smiling nearby, and Emily, a tiny figure at the edge of the page, her head lowered. "Why aren't you standing closer, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She looked at me, then her eyes wide and searching. After a long silence, she whispered, "There's no room." Those 3 words broke me more than any sob. I wanted to scoop her into my arms, to march into James's house and demand that he open his eyes. But instead, I smoothed her hair and forced a smile. "There's always room," I said. "Always." Yet deep inside, a chill settled over me. Something was unraveling in that household thread by thread, and if no one spoke up, Emily would disappear, not in body but in spirit. That night, as I walked her home, the street lamps flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. Emily's shadow stretched beside mine, small and fragile. I realized then that shadows tell stories too, the stories children cannot yet find words for. Miss Harper's words haunted me for days, echoing with every glance I stole at Emily's solemn little face. And then, almost as if fate itself had grown impatient, an opportunity arrived. James called late one evening, his voice hurried. He and Clara had to travel to Portland for a business matter and would take Noah with them. "Mom," he said, "could Emily stay with you for a few days?" I agreed. Before he had even finished the sentence, relief coursed through me. Perhaps in my care, Emily might finally exhale. The first morning she stayed, I made pancakes, the kind with blueberries, just as Anna once did. I placed a plate in front of her, golden and steaming. Emily looked at it long and hard, then whispered, "If I spill the syrup, will you still let me eat?" My throat closed, but I forced a calm nod. "Of course, sweetheart, pancakes are meant to be messy." Only then did she dare to take a bite. Later that afternoon, as the September sun warmed the porch, I set out 2 glasses of lemonade. Emily sat beside me, her legs swinging off the chair, her doll clutched in one hand. She sipped quietly, then placed the glass down, eyes darting toward me. "Grandma," she said softly, "if I'm not good, she doesn't let me eat." For a moment, the world around me seemed to still, the breeze in the trees, the distant sound of the ocean, even the tick of the clock from inside. I stared at her, searching her face, willing her to continue. Emily twisted the hem of her shirt. One time she whispered, "Clara made apple pie." Everyone got a piece. I had to watch. She told me, "Only good girls get dessert." Tears blurred my vision, but I swallowed them back. "Oh, Emily," I murmured, pulling her into my arms. She resisted at first, stiff, as if even comfort required permission. Then she crumbled sobs, shaking her frail frame. I held her, rocking gently, feeling every broken syllable as she confessed the punishments I had dreaded to hear, being locked in the dark storage room, scolded for the smallest mistakes, silence enforced with withheld meals. I stroked her hair and promised, "No one can take food from you here. Not ever again." The next day, as I walked Emily to school, her classmate Sam ran up with a mischievous grin. "Mrs. Hale," he said, tugging at my sleeve, "Emily always eats my cookies. Teacher says it's okay, but she says she has to. She says she's scared she won't get dinner at home." Emily's face went scarlet. She pulled at my hand, urging me to walk faster. My heart broke into 1,000 jagged pieces. Children should sneak cookies for fun, not out of fear. That evening, I baked an apple pie. When I set the first slice before her, Emily froze. "Really?" She asked, disbelief clouding her voice. "Really?" I said, my tone firm, brooking no argument. "This is yours." She picked up the fork slowly, as though expecting it to be snatched away. Then she took a small bite, her lips trembling. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was release. As I watched her eat spoonful by spoonful, I felt both fury and clarity settle in my bones. Fury at Clara's cruelty, clarity that silence would no longer protect anyone. Emily leaned against me that night, eyes half closed, her belly finally full. "Grandma," she murmured, "I like it here. I don't have to be afraid to eat." I kissed her hair, whispering a vow that tasted like steel on my tongue. She will never go hungry for love again. Not while I draw breath. Emily's words and the sight of her eating apple pie as if it were a forbidden treasure did not leave me. That night, as she slept peacefully for the first time in my house, I sat in the living room staring at the clock, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing down the hall. My heart told me what my mind feared to accept. I could not rely on my son to see what was happening. If I was to protect Emily, I needed proof beyond my trembling suspicions. It came piece by piece. The following afternoon, Tom waved me over from his porch. His rocking chair creaked under his weight, the same as it had for years. He leaned forward, voice low. "Margaret." I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I saw something a while back. His eyes clouded. Emily. She was kneeling in the yard in the rain, crying. Clara stood there, watching, arms crossed. I wanted to step in, but she snapped at me to mind my own business. My breath caught my hands trembling against the railing. "Are you certain?" I asked, though the answer was plain in his solemn gaze. He nodded slowly. "I've raised 6 kids, Margaret. I know discipline when I see it." That wasn't discipline, that was cruelty. I thanked him, though the words barely reached my lips. I walked home with the weight of his confession pressing on my chest. Days later, Miss Harper called me aside after school. She held a stack of papers in her hand, children's drawings. "Mrs. Hale, I don't want to alarm you, but there's something I've noticed with Emily." She handed me a sheet. Emily had drawn a house. James, Clara, and Noah stood together, smiling. Off to the side, a tiny figure crouched, faceless hands pressed against her knees. She asks permission for everything. Miss Harper continued, "May I take a pencil? May I color? May I go to the restroom?" I try to reassure her, but she looks at me like she's afraid she'll do something wrong. Children don't act like that unless they've learned fear at home. I trace the lines of the drawing with my finger, my throat aching. "Thank you," I whispered, though gratitude felt hollow in the face of such a revelation. And then on Sunday, I found myself at St. Andrew's Church. Father Andrew, an old priest with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you, welcomed me with his usual kindness. But when I asked about Emily, his face grew grave. "She is a good child," he said softly, "but lately she hides behind her silence. When I ask her questions after Mass, she barely lifts her head. Clara always answers for her smiling as if it were nothing. But it is something, Margaret. Silence in a child can be louder than any cry." I sat in the wooden pew, my hands clenched together, fighting back tears. 3 voices now, Tom. Miss Harper, Father Andrew, all telling me the same story in different ways. And layered over their accounts were Emily's own whispers, her trembling confessions of withheld meals and locked doors. Clara. To the outside world, she was radiant. She baked pies for neighbors, greeted everyone at church with a warm embrace, laughed easily at James's side. She had built a mask of motherhood so convincing that even I, for a time, wanted to believe it. But behind closed doors, that mask turned into iron. Walking home, I felt fury boiling beneath my grief. Clara had deceived us all, but worse. She had turned my granddaughter's life into a series of permissions and punishments. And now, with the voices of others joining Emily's, the truth stood before me, undeniable, unshakable. That evening, I sat by Emily's bed as she colored quietly. I watched her hesitate before reaching for a crayon, her hand pausing midair. I nudged the box closer. "Emily," I said, my voice steady, "you never have to ask me if you can draw. This is your home, too." She looked up, eyes wide as if unsure whether to believe me. I held her gaze, letting her see the resolve burning in mine. Because now I knew silence had protected Clara long enough. It was time to tear the mask away. By the time James and Clara returned from Portland, the truth weighed so heavily on me I could no longer keep it tucked away. Tom's trembling account, Miss Harper's careful concern, Father Andrew's grave words, all of it echoed in my ears as I stood in the kitchen preparing supper that evening. The stew simmered on the stove, its aroma filling the house, but my hands shook as I set the table. This would not be an ordinary meal. When they walked through the door, Clara's smile was polished as ever, her voice honey-sweet as she handed me a bag of pastries from the city. "For you, Margaret," she said warmly, though her eyes flickered with calculation. James looked tired, worn from travel, but glad to be home. Emily, however, pressed herself against my side, her small fingers gripping the fabric of my dress. We all sat at the table, the bowls of stew steaming before us. For a few moments, silence held, broken only by the clink of silverware. Then, with my heart pounding, I set my spoon down. "James," I said, my voice steady, though it trembled inside me, "do you know that your daughter has to ask for permission to eat?" The air froze. James blinked, confused, glancing first at me, then at Clara. Clara did not flinch. She placed her spoon neatly beside her bowl and smiled, calm as stone. "Children need discipline," she said evenly. "Eating is not an automatic right. It is a privilege. It teaches them gratitude." The fury in me surged like a wave. Privilege. My hand struck the table, the sound startling even me. "She is 7 years old, Clara. 7 food is not a privilege. It is life. It is love. And you've twisted it into punishment." James frowned, his brow furrowing. "Mom, maybe you're misunderstanding. Clara has been good for Emily. She's more obedient now, less—" His words faltered as he looked at his daughter. Emily sat rigid, her eyes wide with terror, hands clenched in her lap. "Look at her, James." I cried, my voice breaking. Is this the face of a child thriving, or of one who fears every breath she takes? Emily's shoulders began to shake. She bit her lip, fighting the tears until finally they broke free. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. "Grandma's right," she cried. Her words tumbled out between gasps. "Mommy Clara doesn't let me eat if I spill something. She locks me in the dark when I break a glass. I'm so scared, Daddy. Please don't make me go back." The room exploded with silence. James's fork slipped from his hand, clattering against the bowl. His face drained of color as he looked at his daughter, her small body shaking with sobs. Clara's mask cracked for the first time. She stood, her voice sharp. "Emily, stop this nonsense. You're making a scene." But I rose too, my hand firm on Emily's back. "No, Clara. She is not making a scene. She is telling the truth. And I will not let you silence her again." I pulled my phone from my pocket, my hands no longer trembling but steady with resolve. "Sarah," I said. When my friend answered, "I need your help. My granddaughter is in danger." I dialed again, this time to Child Protective Services, my voice clear and unwavering as I reported the abuse. Clara's face blanched fury, flashing in her eyes. James sat frozen, torn between disbelief and the undeniable truth, sobbing before him. Emily clung to me, her tears soaking through my blouse, but for the first time she was not crying alone. That night, as the sound of my calls echoed through the house, I felt something shift. The silence that had bound us was broken. The storm had arrived, and I was no longer afraid to face it. The days after that dinner blurred into a storm of paperwork, phone calls, and long nights of waiting. Social workers arrived, their faces kind but firm, listening carefully to Emily's trembling words. For the first time, her whispers were recorded, not dismissed. And though Clara raged, insisting it was all exaggeration, the tide had already turned. Weeks later, we stood in the county courthouse. The old oak benches creaked as neighbors filled the back rows, faces I recognized from Sunday Mass and the corner grocery. I held Emily's hand tightly as we waited for the judge. Her palm was damp in mine, but she didn't pull away. When the proceedings began, one by one, the truth took shape. Tom, steady in his plaid jacket, spoke with sorrow in his voice. "I saw her kneeling in the rain," he testified. "No child deserves that. No child." Miss Harper followed, her tone professional yet pierced with compassion. She laid out the drawings Emily's small figure scribbled outside her family again and again. She asked permission for crayons for bathroom breaks, behaviors of a child conditioned to fear, she explained. And then Father Andrew, his collar gleaming under the courtroom lights, spoke with quiet authority. "I have watched her fall silent in places where children should laugh. Silence is sometimes the loudest cry for help. Each testimony was like a stone placed on a scale, tipping the balance of truth until it could no longer be denied." Clara sat rigid, her smile gone, her hands clenched into fists. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a strict but loving mother, but the evidence and Emily's quiet tears as she clutched her rag doll drowned those words. The judge's gavel fell with a finality that shook the air. Clara was found guilty of child abuse. She lost custody of Emily and even Noah. Her son would live primarily with James, though Clara would have visitation under supervision. James filed for divorce soon after. I watched him sit across the courtroom, his shoulders bowed as though the weight of years had finally crashed upon him. When the papers were signed, he came to me with tears streaming down his face. "Mom," he said, voice breaking, "I failed her. I failed my own daughter." I pulled him close, whispering, "You were blind, James, but now you see. Don't waste the second chance." Emily's healing did not happen overnight. Trust once broken takes time to grow again. Yet I began to see flickers of light return to her eyes. She laughed shyly at a puppy chasing its tail. She sang softly while coloring. She no longer asked if she was allowed to finish her glass of milk. One Sunday afternoon, I baked an apple pie. The scent filled my kitchen just as it had in Anna's day, rich with cinnamon and butter. I placed a warm slice in front of Emily, the crust golden and flaking. She stared at it for a moment, her lips parted. Then, for the first time, she didn't ask permission. She picked up her fork, took a bite, and smiled. Not a small, hesitant smile, but one that lit her whole face. I wiped my eyes, though I let the tears fall freely. Because in that moment, I knew justice had been done. But more importantly, love had finally freed her from fear. As I sat across from my granddaughter, her laughter ringing in my small Oregon kitchen, I understood a truth I wish the world would never forget. Real love is never conditional. It is not rationed, not earned, not dangled like a prize. It is given without question, without fear. And in Emily's radiant smile, I saw the beginning of her new life.